Hola amigos, bien o no. Y saludos otra vez desde Medellín. Hoy, ¿qué es nuestro tema? Como nuestro viaje para empezar una nueva lengua hasta fluidez. Cómo funciona y para recordar que es poco a poco. Muchas escalas. Listo. So that's the theme today. We're going to look at a topic that came up over the last couple of days with some new students of mine talking about how do we do this? How will this progress? How are we going to study the language and what process we're going to follow? So this is my understanding of, well, let's say our fluency timeline. Well, let's be clear what I mean by fluency. So fluency really, in the end, I would say, is that you're able to talk on many topics, not necessarily all topics, but many topics, without having to prepare too much. So basically you can improvise. You can be in a room with someone that they're going to start a conversation. You can understand more or less what it's about. You can ask useful questions or interesting questions if it's a very new topic for you. But at least you can take part in the conversation actively. You don't just have to sit there and like, I don't know what's going on. So an ability to improvise really, regardless of the situation. And probably if we go beyond that, the very end of our language journey is when we're able to read without too much difficulty, more complicated text, let's say things like poetry, literature, and maybe even get to the point where we can quite easily translate from these back into our own native language. But let's have a look at the timeline. Yeah. So here we go. That's us at the beginning. Well, that's me at the beginning. Where do we start? Okay, well, awful lot of listening, clearly, and maybe with some basic phrases, hello, how are you, my name is, nice to meet you, some of those basic type of phrases. Because that gets you used to listening and speaking on a very limited level in a few situations. We carry on the listening and the speaking of these basic phrases. We get back into more, let's say, everyday conversations. So our routine, whatever that is, whether it's because we're at a new job and so that becomes our everyday routine, or maybe it's, we're on a holiday, so again, we have a particular routine with that, or where we're living now, we're going to, let's say, shops, things like this type of everyday conversation. So this cycle repeats. Our basic phrases will slowly add vocabulary, which we're picking up from all the listening we're doing and the repetition day by day. And we're going to help ourselves with this with a lot of reading, and particularly reading out loud, because the reading lets us pick topic areas for specific vocabulary that perhaps we're not hearing in our everyday conversations. We can use the reading to amplify this vocabulary, and it helps us get more confident in how we sound, because we can practice much longer phrases, groups of phrases, speak for longer. And then we can transition that into what we would say is specific dialogues. So we look again at more technical language, things we need perhaps for our job, particular types of questions we need to ask. And again, we're listening an awful lot the whole time. The listening process is very important because this helps us to understand, one, more the vocabulary that's around us, but also we're listening for the rhythm, the pattern of the speech of the new language to help us better mimic that when we're doing our reading and our speaking. So finally, we've gone from basic phrases through components like everyday conversations. We're using listening, reading and speaking in like a repetitive fashion to help us improve that. As we get more confident, we're able to move to more specific dialogues for particular situations, bring in a lot more technical words. Again, starting to ask some questions so we can start moving the conversations instead of just passively having to wait for someone to ask us something. We can start asking questions. And eventually, by the time we pick all these things together, as we develop this, our skills improve, our confidence grows, and finally, I say we should be what I would judge as fluency, which is an ability basically to improvise. We can bring all these things together, the questions, the speaking, the different technical words, some of our practice in different dialogues. So then we're able to improvise in a different situation, carry on a conversation on something that we didn't prepare for perhaps, and that I think will be our judge of we're fluent, at least we're functionally fluent. Obviously we can always improve, but to do that it's just another cycle of more things. We need to basically come across more words. Our easy way to do that is just to continue reading on different topics that interest us. So there we go. That's basically how I would suggest I think it kind of unfolds. Quite how long this takes will depend a lot on us, how much time we have to throw at the project, because it depends. You might, like me, be living in the country where your new language is all around you all day. So I get plenty of practice, at least at everyday conversations. But maybe this is something that you have to study on your own and you're not actually at the country you want to practice with, let's say, native speakers. So this is something you might have to generate yourself by a process of listening to a lot more, doing lots of reading aloud and slowly developing your competence with specific dialogues and the questions you can use to move that forward. But generally the mechanics of it, it's more of a listen to as much in the new language as possible. Use that to help guide your reading, and particularly your reading aloud, because you can mimic what you've heard in terms of the rhythms of speech. And eventually you get to practice it live with real dialogues and as many conversations as you can get. And that's where you start getting some proper feedback, use good questions, and eventually they'll come together. There we go. So, hope that's helpful. Déjame saber en los comentarios. Until next time, from Medellin, cheerio for now.